It's been several months since I did any work on the 1964 3 horsepower Johnson. In that time, I really haven't done very much. But what I did do is I dismantled pretty much everything I've already put together and decided to have everything sandblasted. Um, and so I've got all the parts that are sandblasted in the box. And my next step is to deal with dents that are in the gas tank. And for that, I'm going to use just regular automotive Bondo and see how that works out. So I've only got a few dents. I'm going to focus on filling in one at a time, mix a bit of Bondo, fill it in, leave it to dry, and start sanding. So that's going to be a fairly long process, and while I'm working on that, I'm going to put self-etching primer on the other parts and get them ready for their final coats of paint. Okay, we'll start with that and keep looking for some other spots, dents and scratches. So I've sanded down the first layer of Bondo with 200 grit, wet, and now I'm going to put on a second thin layer and just try and build up where the dents are, and then sand it again. And when I think I've got the shape right and all the scratches out, it'll be ready for primer. Not looking to add a lot of hardener, otherwise it'll kick too fast. So just drop. Even that's a bit too much. So gotta make sure I work fairly quickly with it. it's already hardened up on me. So I gotta make sure I put in less hardener next time. So I'm gonna let that dry, then give it another sanding, and start sanding with 400 next time until I get a nice smooth finish. I've sanded down the second application of Bondo, and now I'm taking a look to see where I still have some obvious indentations. I can feel one in here. I've got one bump here I haven't put anything on. And this is still needs a little bit right in here. I'm going to mix another little batch of Bondo and apply it. This time I'm going to try and make sure I don't add too much hardener so that it doesn't sit up too quickly. That can be a little tough to do when you're making just small batches. Okay, we're going to let that sit up and sand again. So finished sanding another coating of Bondo, and we start off with wet sanding at 200 grit, then 400, then 800, and I think I'm 90% there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put a coat of self-etching primer over the whole thing, and the primer will really make any of the remaining defects stand out. And then we'll do one more touch-up, another light sanding, and then the final coat of primer. So this is a tank with its first coat of primer. I've got some runs in the paint here and there. I'm going to sand those down. and I'm going to look for any edges that are left with poor feathering in the Bondo. And once I've detected all of those, either I'll sand it down some more or maybe just touch it up a little bit. You can see right here how the primer really shows the hard edges, makes them stand out. So I'm going to give this a light sanding with 800 grit, and then either sand the Bondo a bit more or maybe even touch up one or two tiny spots. So I've used the primer to locate the last remaining bumps and imperfections in the Bondo, and given them a good sanding with 800 grit. And this is ready for another spray of primer, and then we'll let that dry at least a week before we put any color on that. Well, it's not perfect, but it's looking really good. So I sanded down a couple of paint imperfections and with 800 grit, and I'm going to let this cure, and we'll be ready to start putting some color on that. After the color, the decals go on, and after the decals are on, it'll be time for a two-part epoxy to seal everything and protect it from any gas spills. In the meantime, we're going to start working on putting the engine block back together, and then we'll be also doing some painting of all the other parts. Take care.